Good morning. It's really nice to be with you today, and thank you so much for joining me. I'm talking to you today about building positive people power in modern day organizations, and just to talk a little bit about some of the experiences that I've been having in all of the organizations where I work, both in Australia and abroad. And I thought I would share with you today 3 common problems that modern day organizations face. So welcome. It's really nice to be here. Just a little bit about me. Who am I? My name is Caryn Walsh, and I'm an executive coach. I do international leadership development or consulting, team development specialist, and I used to be a former university lecturer and a psychologist, psychotherapist. I've worked on 3 different continents, actually about to be 4 really. So where I've worked at the moment is in Australia, where I work a lot. I work in Fiji a great deal. I'm just about to go into Papua New Guinea, and I've done a lot of work in Africa. So my work really is around leadership development, team development, organizational strategies, and I absolutely love the work that I do. I've been developing leaders and teams and helping organizations grow for about 25 years now, and I find really the different organizations and the different cultures in which I work really both challenging and so stimulating, because each company is different, each culture is different, and it's really fascinating and fantastic to have the opportunity. I own a business, and that's really a business which I'll explain a little bit later on, called Pure Magic International Business Solutions. And I also run a strategic initiative called Empowering Women to Thrive, which is all about helping women become much more empowered in their lives and to learn key skills such as communication and resilience and being assertive and managing stress well to live more effectively. Really for today, my focus is firmly on developing leaders and teams, and that's really what I wanted to share with you, because I feel that there's a lot of similarities in a lot of the organizations that we work in, both in Australia and abroad. And the 3 common challenges that I will talk to you about today are really strangely across all organizations. It doesn't matter where we go. And these 3 common challenges that I've actually written up, I've done so because no matter where I go, we find these same issues consistently wherever. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I believe that obviously, they say that there is no I in teams, and that is correct, because organizations that have effective and highly performing teams are organizations that tend to be more successful, productive, effective, efficient, profitable. And yet one of the most amazing things I find is that even though we know that that's the case, there always seems to be issues around creating and sustaining highly impactful teams. And so one of my real issues of fascination and training is around helping organizations have more effective teams and what that means to them. And sometimes it's just the basics of trying to help organizations get highly performing teams formed and sustained. And once they've done that, how much impact it makes, that I find really fascinating and what I really love to do. So I'm an author. I've written 4 or 5 books. I'm a columnist, so I write a lot for the international media. I write a lot for the media in Australia. I do a lot of speaking. I speak at about 20 conferences a year, and absolutely love to have the opportunity to I guess just do what I love to do, which is to connect with people, to develop leaders, to develop teams, people, and organizations, regardless of the continent in which I work. So that's all really exciting, and I really enjoy what I do. So welcome, and it's really lovely to be with you today. So here's just a photograph of some of the people with whom I work, both here and overseas. And one of the things I always say is how wonderful the opportunity has been for me to be able to work across so many different cultures and with so many different types of people, because it doesn't necessarily only impact their lives, but it certainly has enabled it to impact mine. And to be able to work cross-culturally has been a true, true gift. And I guess that's the other thing that's really important, which is that working cross-culturally has made me really understand that it doesn't really matter where we work or with whom we work. At the end of the day, the work that Pure Magic International Business Solutions does is about, whilst it is about developing people, growing people, and developing organizations, it's really dealing with humans. It's dealing with people. And it doesn't matter, as I said earlier, where we go, we've got the same issues. And it's probably more about people issues and human issues as opposed to leadership teams or organizational issues. Because, of course, it's human beings who are leaders. It's human beings who make up teams. And it's human beings who run organizations. So that's what the common thread across all organizations is. Humans, people power, or lack thereof. So a little recognition along the way. I think it's probably, my team and I have been really lucky. And so whilst I show you these recognition pieces that we've picked up along the way, it's not me on my own. It's the team that I have around me. I was very, very lucky to coach the 2016 Australian CEO of the Year last year. Her name is Viv Allinson. She runs a huge aged care service in Newcastle in Australia. And to be able to coach her and to receive that award was just a fabulous achievement. I was lucky enough to be a finalist in the Women in International Business Award, which was bestowed by the New South Wales Premier. And that was really, really wonderful. And that was for most of the work that I've been doing in Fiji with both, as I said earlier, leaders and teams, organizations, and I think increasingly with women, which has been a really, really wonderful, wonderful accolade to the work that we all do. My team and I, that is. In 2015, I was the Learning and Development Professional of the Year finalist given by the Australian Institute of Training and Development, which was a real honour. I didn't really realise that I was up for that. My team members put me in, so that was a real little gift. And ultimately, in 2014, we won a national award for our top teams creating and sustaining high performance. So it's a 5-stage program of how to go into organizations and to create and to sustain high performance as teams. So that's a little bit about some of the things we've done well. And of course, whilst those accolades and the recognition is lovely, it's not everything that we do. Obviously, it's the outcomes that we get for our clients, and it's how we help them grow their people and develop their organizations that we really mostly focus on. So the 3 common problems modern day organizations face. Well, when I think about, again, coming back to when I started today, when I think about what are those common problems, bearing in mind that these common problems are the problems that we've collected from all different sectors, so from government, education, corporate, community, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what continent. These seem to be the consistent 3 problems that modern day organizations, regardless of where they are, face. Now, obviously, it's not the same for every organization. Some organizations do these really well, but mostly our experience and our looking at different organizations are these 3. So number 1, and they're not necessarily in order of importance, but I've put them in this order because I think that the one builds on the other, which then builds on or results in the third. So the very first one then is ineffective leadership. And I know that there's so many organizations, maybe like ours, who are out there sort of doing leadership development and helping leaders become more capable and competent in what they do. And that's really important. And I'm sure that many people think sort of, oh, here I go, ineffective leadership. But I'm talking about leadership that's really, really authentic leadership. People who understand how to lead others, people who understand how to motivate others, people who understand how to really influence and impact those people around them in a way that really moves them and motivates them to want to create great things, as opposed to just going to a 1 or 2 day leadership development program. I don't think that those programs necessarily help greatly in the end. It's more around moving people to understand what leadership really is and how to motivate and influence those around them, and to come from an authentic place of really leadership and leading people. And it doesn't always have to be from the front, by the way. If we think about the concept of servant leadership, which is around how can I actually serve my people as opposed to what I want my people to do for me. So that's a whole nother issue. But the issue around ineffective leadership, I think, is a really key aspect. The second one then is inadequate communication in organizations. And as I go through the presentation, I'll make it very clear to you as to what I mean by inadequate communication, because very often people think, well, you know, we didn't get the email and we haven't had a team meeting. Yes, those things are significant, because if we don't know what's going on, then how will we be able to do our jobs well? If we're not told what the expectations are, or if it's not explained to us what we need to do, then how will we know what the outcomes are firstly, but also how will we be able to measure the success of what we're doing? So inadequate communication is a key issue for most organizations. And I'm talking about from the top of the organization to the bottom. I'm also talking about across the organization. And I'm also talking about from the bottom of the organization up. So that ongoing ability to understand what's going on, you know, what the drivers are of the business, or what's going on even with the competition, is a really, really sore and large issue that needs to be addressed in modern day organizations. And then the last one is consistently, regardless of where we go, ongoing workplace conflict. And it doesn't matter at what level or in what, you know, type of organization, the ongoing conflict of not only whereby one, you know, team member doesn't talk to the other team member, but very often it's around, you know, one department doesn't talk to another department. Or you have people or organizations in a similar industry who might be stakeholders relying on each other, but they don't want to engage with each other, or they don't want to communicate with each other. And ultimately then the person or the organization or the community that this organization is serving is affected because we don't resolve issues, or we don't communicate effectively, or we're not being led well. And so each of these three things then impacts on the other. And ultimately what we've got is that we've got essentially the customer largely is the one who pays the price for ineffective leadership, inadequate communication in and across organizations or sectors. And ultimately then ongoing workplace conflict then means that we have lower efficiencies, lower productivity, and ultimately the customer or the client pays the price. So ineffective leadership, I will then just very briefly deal with each of those one by one, so that I make it very much more clear as to what I mean by each of these. So when I'm talking about ineffective leadership, it does vary from industry to industry, because each industry obviously has different demands on leaders, different types of work that they have to do. So I will acknowledge that, you know, leadership demands and leadership trends might be industry specific. However, that doesn't necessarily mean then that the way that people lead is specific, or the way that each industry demands leaders to lead is different. Essentially, coming back to what I said when I started today, it's the same, ladies and gentlemen, across all sectors. It's more about how we lead and the way in which we motivate and influence. It's important, not the industry per se. Common threads include lack of leadership understanding. So, you know, things as basic as that there is a difference, obviously, between leadership and managing. And sometimes you have to have the ability and the understanding in the heat of the moment to do both, because it depends on what you're dealing with. But what I often find is that people who are in key roles in organizations don't necessarily know which it is that they're doing, or don't understand the principles of leadership. And an example might be, you know, things as basic as creating a strong vision for an organization. Because if we don't know where we're going, and that includes the people down the line and the people at the top of the organization, if we don't know where we're going and we're not united by a common vision or a common calling, then how do we know, A, where we're going, and B, when we've arrived? So what we often find when we are brought into organizations is that leaders don't necessarily know the importance of having a really, really united vision. And equally as importantly then, they don't realize how important it is that every person in their organization knows what that is. So those are the sort of basic things I'm talking about when leaders don't really understand the key components of what's necessary to be a highly influential and effective leader. So that's the first point. Inconsistency in driving performance and expecting outcomes. So when I'm talking about inconsistency in driving performance, and I think this is another important point, when I talk about ineffective leadership, I'm not just talking about at the top of the organization, I'm talking about down the organization at every level. And you might have, for example, great leaders at the top of the organization who don't drive performance and don't drive business outcomes down the organization. And then what you've got is that you've got great leaders at the top, potentially mediocre leaders in the middle, and then ineffective leaders down the line. And ultimately what you've got then is that you haven't got that consistency in driving performance and expecting or even demanding outcomes that are all attached to the vision, because that exemplary leadership and that consistent leadership isn't being taken down the line. And we find this everywhere we go. So it's about really thinking about, what are we doing with the leadership? Do we have an understanding and the skills at the top, in the middle, and down the line? And do we all, are we all in the same boat, rowing the same way? Do we all have a common understanding, or are they different? So unless there is a common understanding and a common calling and a common performance driving, often organizations struggle, and it's a leadership issue. Not comprehending that organizations need to focus on both tasks and relationships. This is a really interesting concept, because time and time again, organizations historically are task focused. So they've got to make X amount of sales each month, or they've got to, put out 300 pairs of shoes in the manufacturing line each month, whatever it is. And I think one of the key things around leadership is that if you focus on tasks only and not focus on relationships, then you will at best be a good organization, maybe, perhaps. But if you don't realize as a leader the importance of relationships and building solid and strong relationships in your organization, with your team, across teams, across departments, then we know from a lot of the research is that you at best might be a goodish or mediocre organization. In fact, I'm very much of the opinion that modern day organizations and modern day success in organizations is really about relationships. So when I think about, when I'm overseas, for example, a lot of the organizations that I believe do well are those organizations who have great relationships with other organizations. I think that modern day business actually is born and dies on good relationships. And my experience, or our experience as Pure Magic International Business Solutions, is that organizations and leaders don't really value the importance of good relationships as much as they do focusing on the tasks and the outcomes. And I say that can be very often a deal breaker. And what I mean by that is that for modern day leaders, it's about a clear focus on getting the job done, very consistent outcomes, exemplary productivity and efficiencies, but at the same time having fantastic relationships where people want to work together and there's an achievement and support culture in organizations. So that's a really, really key point. And wherever I go, regardless of the industry, the sector, the organization, or the content, I make this a very clear outcome of most leadership and team development programs that I run. Personality issues is an issue regarding leadership. And what I mean by that is that, some personalities who lead are people who might be more extroverted, more outgoing. Others might be more introverted and more quiet, more reflective, and those are absolutely fine. But I think where the problem lies is very often where people or leaders are inconsistent in the way that they behave. So sometimes they're moody, sometimes they greet their staff, sometimes they ignore their staff, and generally it will never work if you've got a leader who is inconsistent, unpredictable, and people don't really know how to read. So what's an example? An example is, let's call him John. I was working with an organization a couple of weeks ago, and I was walking with the CEO, and we were walking down the corridor to his office. And there were two staff members walking towards us. So as we walked past, and I'm chatting to John and looking at him, as these two staff members came towards me, I said, "Oh, good morning." And they said, "Oh, good morning." And they kept walking, and we kept going that way. At the end of it, I got back to John's office, and I said, "John, just a question. is there a reason why you didn't speak or greet those two staff members? And he said to me, which staff members, Caryn? And I said, the two staff members that just walked past us. And he said, I didn't see them. Now, I think, it sounds crazy, but I think that there's an inherent learning in this, is that if you don't see your staff, if you don't greet your staff, if you don't acknowledge your staff, the question is, why are you in the leadership role? Because one of the key roles of a leader is to motivate and to influence. And if you don't even greet them, or you greet them occasionally, or you grunt at them, or you nod at them, is that really relating well with them? So I find a lot of the time, the ability to relate well and the ability to be expressive with staff is lacking. So I'm going to give you a very, very quick thing about Smith's Manufacturing. So Smith's Manufacturing obviously isn't an organization, it's not the true name, but this is what we did. So what I thought I would do is, for each of the 3 issues that we have uncovered and that we find so consistent in organizations, I'm going to give you an example of what we have done in some organizations, but on this particular occasion, I'm going to talk about Smith's Manufacturing. So ineffective leadership, what did we find? So we looked at where problems arose for Smith's Manufacturing. And obviously, a lot of the problems were in the leadership. And for the reasons that I've just described, they didn't necessarily have the capability or the technical nous, or they didn't have the relationship strengths around leading well. So we looked at those. We looked at why decisions were not made or followed through. So sometimes decisions were made in Smith's Manufacturing, but they weren't followed through, or the leader would make the decision and then not involve the staff, or the staff had no idea of what the decisions were. So, the product wasn't put on the production line, or it wasn't sold. So there was a lack of understanding as to what was being done, or what the outcomes were. We assessed competencies of leaders. And in so doing, when we then uncovered that there were some areas of a lack of competence, the idea was that, okay, so we needed to introduce a competency framework. So what were those key core competencies that leaders needed to have in Smith's Manufacturing in order to lead well? And then what we realized is that we needed to train and upskill leaders at the top and down the line. Now, not all leaders. I mean, a lot of the leaders did have some of the core competencies. Some of them had done sort of leadership training 20 or 30 years ago, so we're a little bit rusty around those things. A lot of them have not necessarily kept up with modern day research and, leadership theory, etc. So we upskilled them. A lot of it was around how to create and maintain great relationships. So we just basically uptrained and upskilled them, really. We refreshed their job description and the key performance indicators. Some of them were unsure about key performance indicators, and there's no criticism with that, because depending on which industry, for example, community services might not be as strong as key performance indicators as corporate organizations might. But at the end of the day, regardless of which industry or which organization, every job has to have key outcomes that need to be measured. The incumbent in that role needs to know exactly what they're responsible for and how they will be measured. Because otherwise, if you're lacking the clarity, how will somebody in the job know what they're supposed to do, or more importantly, what the key outcomes of their job is, or whether they've achieved them? So very much clarity around who's responsible for what and how that is going to be measured. And then for some, particularly Smiths, we put in a robust performance appraisal system. And interestingly enough, one of the people in Smith's Manufacturing had not had a performance appraisal for 6 years. So the key outcome of that is that, let's just say that in your organization, you do have them every year or every 6 months, although in Smith's, they haven't had it for a longer time. You can have a really good performance appraisal system in your organization. But if it's not used well, ladies and gentlemen, and if it's not implemented properly, it really becomes null and void. So it's about using or implementing a robust appraisal process that's going to really help your people flourish. And that includes the competencies involved in their role. It includes the performance appraisal process, identifying what they do well, areas of struggle. And if they've got areas of struggle, then a personal or a professional development program with timelines and how their skills gaps are going to be addressed. It's also about celebrating the high achievers, but really also learning what to do with the non-achievers or the low achievers, because far too many organizations we work with really tolerate no performance or low performance. And if you tolerate low performance or non-performance, I can promise you this is that ultimately the other people around the non-performers get frustrated and resentful, the productivity reduces, the efficiencies go down the gurgler, and ultimately you've got a dysfunctional team, which can really then impact the organization overall. So this is what we did with Smiths. And we held leaders and staff accountable for everything that they did. And I think one of the key things I say when I speak at conferences, and I'll mention this today, is that I honestly believe that the success of any modern day organization is born or dies on the sword of leadership. So if you don't have the leaders in the right roles, if you don't have the competencies and the capabilities and the skills and the strategies and all the things I've been talking about, ultimately the organization is going to struggle. And the other thing is that if you do have those, it is about holding your leaders accountable, because they need to be accountable for driving results, for driving success, and for having great relationships in their organization or their departments, and for creating cultures in their teams or organizations that are based on achievement and support of their people and each other. So I think those are really, really important things that we did with Smiths Manufacturing, and the outcomes were ultimately fantastic. Add some fun, have a fun, time, a lot of organizational development strategies, our key communication processes, a very strong and robust strategic plan, all those kind of things is what we did with Smiths Manufacturing. They did not have a strategic plan. So strategic plan really is the plan that drives the whole organization forward. And if you don't have that and people don't know what it is, then you're going to struggle. So those are all the things that we did for Smiths Manufacturing under the area of ineffective leadership, and the organization was turned significantly around. So when we then go into the second part of it, inadequate communication, where people say, well, I didn't know that, Caryn, or nobody told us that, Caryn. This is a key problem in modern day organizations, and I say over and over again. Nobody knows what's going on, or nobody knows the full story of what's going on, or only some people think they know what's going on and other people don't know what's going on. So that creates confusion, that creates problems, not just for the people down one line, but across the organization. If we don't have transparent and consistent communication, how will we know what we need to do? And it's a really, really big issue in modern day organizations. The good thing about communication, ladies and gentlemen, is that actually it's not that difficult or hard to improve. It just needs to be procedural and strategic in the way that you do it, have some organizational development strategies in the fold, and ultimately it can be quite easily fixed. It's not that hard. But then do you find, for example, silos in your organization? One department does not talk to the other. So sales doesn't talk to production, who doesn't like marketing, who really doesn't get along with finance. And 9 times out of 10, we find this in organizations. And of course, when you've got one part doesn't talk to the other part, I promise you that the outcome will be ongoing workplace conflict, besides inefficiencies, lack of productivity, and ultimately maybe a lack of profitability. So teams and organizational, departments don't talk to each other. They don't pull together. People find out after the fact or not at all. I didn't know that, Caryn. Well, why weren't we told? And, well, how come sales is the only person who knows and we don't? All those kind of things that you must know in your organizations, or if maybe not in your current organization, then in organizations that you've worked with in the past. And of course, this not communicating and this being left out of the loop affects morale and productivity, and at your best people go. Because how many times have we walked around organizations where we've seen people on the internet without them knowing? We know that they're looking for other roles, other jobs in other organizations because they're unhappy. And, ineffective leadership and inadequate communication, well, those are the 2 causes of people looking to go and join your competitors. So what we did in Smith's Manufacturing, we worked out why people don't talk to each other. And there's obviously a whole range of different reasons, time pressure, lack of resources, a misunderstanding of what's being needed, leaders not pulling together. So we looked at why people don't talk to each other. We look at also, this was a really important point, we looked at the process of why departments miscommunicate. So that really goes into the process of, and systems of what happens in organizations. And so once we did a mapping of what happens in organizations and what departments reliant on what department, because, the domino effect. And once we understood the process and the mapping of organizations, then we were able to identify where communication at times misses, if you like. Because at the end of the day, every department in organizations relies on the other parts of the organization to be productive. So in order for finance to do their job, they need to know what operations has done and how many products, sales and marketing have sold. And if they don't talk to each other, well, ultimately then they miscommunicate, and then that affects business. Clients may be left out of the loop, product might not be sold or distributed, and so organizations ultimately suffer. We worked out a few simple departmental strategies to implement to help them communicate better. And once we were able to do that with consistent outcomes and consistent things, for example, like team meetings. Now you might say, well, yes, we have consistent team meetings, Caryn, we do that really well. Well, that might be good, but Smiths didn't. Or if they did them randomly, or they did them inconsistently. And also, for example, they wouldn't have agendas, or they didn't have time frames for meetings. There was no real outcomes, and if there's no outcomes for any meeting, regardless what that meeting is, team meeting or not, there's no point in having them, ladies and gentlemen. Unless there are outcomes, there's no point in having them. Unless it's a social meeting, social lunch and getting together. But even then, there's outcomes, which might be literally having good times together or getting to know each other a little bit better. So strategically, what you're doing in terms of communication needs to be in a way that has outcomes. Why are we doing this? I always say why. What is the why? Then we worked out what the whole organisation needed. So then we implemented a range of different communication strategies where we held various people in the organisation accountable for driving more effective communication, and it worked out fantastically well and still is. Now staff retention has increased by 67%, employee engagement by 36%, and communication is better than ever. And so even though those statistics are fairly high, it wasn't that difficult to do once you get the processes and the procedures and the systems and the strategies and the techniques in place to actually turn the organisation around, and there's no reason why yours can't be just as successful in these areas. So then when we get to the very last one, which is ongoing workplace communication or conflict really, those I believe that ongoing workplace conflict is an outcome of ineffective leadership and inadequate communication. So if you've got the two, really then results in the third being the outcome. So ongoing workplace conflict, and what you might say, well, what does it look like? Okay, well, it looks like people pull against each other. So it really comes back to what I was saying in ineffective leadership and inadequate communication. People don't talk. What you then often get is people talk about each other, much like kindergarten, and have you heard about this, and look at him, and can't believe she's so ineffective in her job. And so you get a lot of the gossiping, you get a lot of the what we call wars, the factions, the alliances, and then often you get the real kind of breeding ground for the workplace bully. And then you get the harassment and the bully. And then very often organizations don't know what to do with the bully. And they implement strategies to deal with the bullies. Generally, workplace bullies are not prevalent in organizations that have strong rules, good, effective leadership, rules around behaviors and how we behave as a team, as a department, as an organization. But unless you address the workplace bully, I promise you one thing, ladies and gentlemen, they are not going away. And sometimes, unless their bullying behavior is addressed, their harassing and conflicting behavior gets worse over time. So manufacturing then doesn't talk to marketing, who hates operations, and they don't support each other. And ultimately, as I said to you a couple of minutes ago, it really is the customer or the client who ultimately pays. And on it goes. So I'm just wondering, if you think about the three things I've just talked to you about now, so then effective leadership, inadequate communication, and ongoing workplace conflict, what's your organisation like? You know, do you have these kind of things that I've been describing to you? Or does your organisation just generally rock and roll and do well? And my experience is, if you're honest with yourself, that you'll find a lot of what I'm talking about in your organisation or in your team. So what we did at Smiths, again, to finish up on the Smiths example, we got the rules right. We got employees to help write the rules. I think this is a very, very key point, because very often you have the leaders only who write the rules, and when they tell the employees what the rules are, it's very much like mum and dad coming up with the family rules and telling the children. What we know from a lot of the research is that if you get the children, or the employees in this case, to help write the rules, there's a greater sense of ownership and responsibility around the rules. So we did this with Smiths, and their outcomes were fantastic. We assess behaviour and tasks against the rules. And ultimately what happens over time is that people in organisations start to self-assess, or they assess each other. And then once that's sort of down pat and done really well, then you often find that behaviours start to be rectified at different levels throughout the organisation. Not all the time, because that then often comes back to leadership and driving performance and expected outcomes, but it certainly went a long way to helping Smiths Manufacturing. We designed a committee including employees to monitor the behaviour and to promote good behaviour, and the camaraderie and the fun that was created out of that was just phenomenal in many ways. We called it a transformational team. And what was really interesting with this was that people were clamoring to get onto that team. We changed the team every 6 months or every year eventually. But when we first started, everybody wanted to get onto it, which was a fantastic energy motivator and engagement process. It was just really, really insightful and effective in what it was trying to do. Employee satisfaction increased 76% in the last survey. And so those were the three things that we found as issues in organisations, and those were the three things that we actually implemented into Smiths Manufacturing. And so when we talk then about by getting your house in order, so what does that mean? I always say that in order to be highly productive, in order to be highly effective and efficient, and to be a profitable organisation, if that's what you want to do, or be an effective organisation if you're in the not-for-profit or community space, what is it that you need to do to get your house in order? So when we look at those, what we talk about in 3 months, when you get your house in order, you go from this. So leaders not pulling together, inadequate and inconsistent communication, ongoing conflict within teams and across departments, power and blame-based organisational culture, where you've got this, it's not my fault, it's your fault, so everybody's pointing their finger at each other, and that's not helpful to anybody, and certainly not your organisation. Unhappy employees who are looking for a better place to work, as I said earlier, ongoing gossip and organisational dysfunction. You go from that to this: competent and motivated leaders, more strategic and consistent communication strategies across departments and the organisation, teams on their way to high performance that are consistently driven to high performance and reminded of how to get to high performance. They feel part of everything. They feel engaged and committed. They're collaborative and supportive of each other. And happy employees who have a sense of pride of being in your organisation. So in 3 to 6 months, really, it might take a little longer, but once you've actually got those strategies under control, and once you've implemented a whole range of different techniques and appropriate strategies to address these things, it's really not that difficult to turn around. It's quite simple, as long as there's commitment, dedication, insight, and perspective involved in doing so. Some of our many clients are happy with their outcomes. Well, there they are. Some of them are here, some of them are abroad. We work across all different sectors. We work in government, we work in hotels, we work in banks, we work in finance, we work in community, we work in corporate, we work in education. And these are the similar strategies we put in all of these organizations, depending on what it is that they need. And it's been an absolute pleasure to work with all of them over the 20 years that we've been operating. It's been a real, real pleasure. So thank you all to our wonderful clients. We love working with you. So look around now and see in your organization or in your team you have workplace politics, people talking about each other, people walking all over each other, people trying to get to the top of the organization or the team or the department and not really caring about those under them. Do you find yourself managing emotions and ongoing conflict and fighting and anger and frustration more than actually managing people to be able to achieve the goals that they want to achieve and to be successful in their roles? Do you find that you have bullying or silos in your organization where sales doesn't talk to marketing, who doesn't talk to, finance, or it could be within the team itself where, this person doesn't talk to that person who doesn't like that person, and so the whole team struggles. And you maybe as the leader have an absolute ongoing headache, a migraine with this team. Do you find that a lot of your people are not happy going to work, or they come to work looking miserable, or they're miserable throughout the day, and when the sort of 5 o'clock and they're leaving, the organisation comes, they start to perk up, and you start thinking, oi, they're leaving today, but they look happy. Those are all signs. And of course, if you've got ineffective leaders who don't actually lead their people, they come, they do their job and go, one has to question whether they should be in leadership. Do they focus on tasks and relationships? Are they the go-to people that people would die on their sword for because they love their leaders? So do you have those in your organisation? Well, if you do, what I would love you to do is let's connect. Go to our website. We're in the process of about to change it, but go to www.puremagicbusiness.com.au. It would be wonderful to hear from you. And so please feel free to connect at any time. Leave a message for us on the website. Please feel free to engage, read some of the blogs, have a look at the things that we're doing. We would absolutely value your contribution, and we look forward to working with you at any time. So stay connected, stay tuned. We would look forward to speaking with you soon. Okay.